What's going on, guys? It's Cimoooooooo. So today I'm bringing to you a meta-analysis for the March 2019 format. Now, we had plenty of events take place last month with stuff like YCS Chicago, YCS Dusseldorf, and plenty of smaller events like regionals, ARG, and PPG Tour events taking place. And we also had the UDS Invitational taking place in Las Vegas at the beginning of the month. So coming out of the aftermath of a brand new ban list, the format was a little bit erratic and we didn't exactly know how things were going to shape up, but now we're starting to see things settle, and this is kind of the direction the format is going to be moving because we're not really getting a lot of big products for the month of March. So while the meta is still going to continue to evolve and people are going to start to adapt their strategies for any particular format, it is going to be a lot more stable than what it was in February. So before we get into it, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you guys don't miss a single upload. And if you really love the content that I produce on this channel, consider supporting me on Patreon or becoming a YouTube channel member, because it's thanks to people like Emmanuel that I'm able to bring you this content on a daily basis. So if you're interested, hit the join button down below or check out the links in the description. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into it. So kicking things off, here is the top 16 pie chart breakdown for the UDS Invitational that took place in Las Vegas. Now, one thing you have to consider, and this is a bit of a caveat, is that you can't really evaluate a UDS in a very similar light to something like a YCS or like regionals or things like that, because while you are going to have a much, higher skill level player attending an event like this on average, the amount of players in a UDS is much lower. So for instance, YCS Chicago, which took place at the beginning of February, had about 1,600 players, where the UDS only had 361. And while that was a record-breaking number for a UDS Invitational, you have to actually qualify by getting enough points to enter one of these events. So the thing is, the amount of players, or at least the skill level of a player that's going to be entering an event like this, is going to be on average a bit higher than what you might expect attending a regional or a YCS. Now obviously there's overlap because some of the best players in the game are going to attend as many events as possible. But what you have to consider is when you're playing in a UDS, it's a 2-day event just similar to that of a YCS, but pretty much every single person you're playing is someone that has like some sort of pedigree when it comes to the game. They might have topped a YCS, they might have topped multiple YCSs, they might have won multiple YCSs, they might be world champion competitors, and the statistical probability of you playing multiple players like that in a row is much higher compared to something that like a YCS, where you're not really going to run into that until you get to the top cut. Whereas at a UDS, you might play someone like that every single round, and that's highly probable to happen. So just keep that in mind, that even though it's a low player attendance, the average level of skill of a player attending this event is a lot higher. And with that in mind, the overall representation of the metagame is going to be a lot more focused and honed in, because a lot of these players know what they're doing, they've played the game for a very long time, and they know how to analyze particular metagames and formats. So the format is going to be highly honed for this particular event compared to something like a YCS, where when you look at a pie chart or you see going into a particular event, yes, X, Y, and Z decks might be the best decks going into it, you're still going to have the opportunity to play a fair bit of rogue decks, especially in your initial rounds, just because of the sheer number of players that attend something like a YCS. But when it comes to a UDS, again, keep in mind that because you have high skill level players, a lot of them are going to be playing meta, so the likelihood of playing meta jumps exponentially compared to something like a regional or a YCS normally would. So that's why when you look at this top 16 breakdown, you see that there's 7 Salamangreat, there's 7 Sky Striker, there's 1 Danger Thunder Dragon, and 1 Danger Orcust Zombie. Now, this was pretty much a very well representation of the field. I mean, if you looked around the room, Salamangreat was everywhere. I mean, there was so much hype around this deck. Everyone was playing it in so many different variants. Some people were maxing out on like Fusion of Fire and actually opting to go second, which I thought was a very interesting idea. Some players were playing the Artifact build that we saw gain a little bit of popularity from YCS Dusseldorf. There there's a lot of different takes that people were doing with the deck, you know, teching cards like Flame Buffalo and just so many different variants that no two Salamangreat builds were the same, and I think that's pretty cool. I mean, you even saw in the top 16 build for Blade YGO, he basically decided to tech Enemy Controller, which we've seen in like Zodiac formats, and since the decks are kind of similar, I kind of buy the argument for why you want to play something like Enemy Controller in the main deck, and obviously it worked for him because he did manage to make top cut. So if you want to check out Blade's profile, I already did that profile, and I'll leave a card for you guys to click on so you can go see that for yourself. But the thing is, when it comes to Salamangreat, it's going to be the most represented deck moving forward in my opinion, just because the deck is fairly linear, but that doesn't mean the deck is bad. It's something that we've seen before in decks like Zodiac, where it does a very simple thing, but it does it very well, it does it consistently, and it's able to replicate that over multiple turns. And when you compare that to a deck like Sky Striker in comparison, Sky Striker isn't like the most difficult deck to pilot, but the thing is, it's a lot more unforgiving if you misplay or if you don't play it to the best of your technical abilities, and that's why sometimes you see Sky Striker players struggle, just because they might misplay and that can cost them the game, whereas a deck like Salamangreat is a little bit more forgiving in that regard. But the deck is able to do a lot of really powerful things. There's enough room in the deck as well that you can tech it for specific metagames or play some tech cards of choice like I mentioned earlier, and overall the deck is just really good. It has a very nice barrier to entry because it's relatively cheap until you really get to the highest tiers of competitive play, so that means you're going to see it a lot not only at the high tiers, but you're going to see it at the local and regional level as well, because it's very easy for a lot of people to acquire the deck, throw in some hand traps, and then they're basically good to go. Now I do want to touch on Sky Striker because Sky Striker did end up winning the event, and it did have equal representation to that of Salamangreat. And the thing is, when it comes to Sky Striker, this is a deck that has proven that it is capable of going the distance in longer events, and with the UDS being 13 rounds of Swiss then cutting to top 16, a lot of the players were on Sky Striker because the deck has proven that it is able to do well in this type of environment. Not to mention with the meta so much more defined and not as much rogue to worry about, you know, players not really going to be playing stuff like Secret Village, at least not in mass compared to what we saw players doing before, something like Altergeist for example. Sky Striker was a very safe bet, and it's really not a surprise that it ended up winning the tournament entirely. Sky Striker has multiple YCS wins under its belt now, and now it even has a UDS that it can claim for itself too, and honestly, the deck is still very good. I feel like until we get our ban list coming up next month in April, Sky Striker is going to continue to just be one of the strongest decks of the format, and you have to just keep that in mind that if you're going to any large event like, you know, YCS Atlanta coming up in a couple weeks, you need to plan for Sky Strikers just as much as you plan for Salamangreat, because these two decks are going to be everywhere. Now, one thing I do want to talk about is Danger Thunder Dragon, because while Danger Thunder Dragon only had one slot in the top 16 breakdown, that doesn't mean that Danger Thunder has completely phased out of the metagame. Again, keep in mind that players wanted to play decks that they knew could go the distance for the UDS in Las Vegas, and with YCS, it's a little bit different because there's a lot more rogue, and Danger Thunder can just absolutely shit on rogue decks because the deck is just like 90% extenders. It's able to do so many things, especially some unfair things, especially compared to decks like Salamangreat or Sky Striker, and it's literally just able to overpower some of the other decks that are going to be at an event like a YCS or regional and things like that. So just because it has very small representation from the UDS, do not underestimate Danger Thunder Dragon at all, because the deck has realistically not gone anywhere. I just think for this particular event, it had a little bit of difficulty dealing with all the different Salamangreat and the Sky Strikers maxing out on as many hand traps as possible, and that gave the deck a little bit of pause. But the deck is still insanely good. It's honestly like my pick for number 3 of top 5 decks of the format, which if you want to check out that video, you can as well, and it's not going anywhere, and I wouldn't be surprised if this deck is still going to continue to top YCS after YCS until the Danger engine gets hit in like some way, shape, or form, because the deck is just way too good. Being able to rip cards out of your opponent's hand, Colossus lock them, and then also have multiple negates in the form of Hot Red Archfiend Abyss. You got stuff like Zombie Stein, Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon. The deck is just too good not to see success. Now the last deck I want to touch on is Danger Orcust, which in this case is Danger Orcust Zombie, and I think it's really neat that we saw a deck like this. Orcust saw a lot of success, it even won YCS Dusseldorf, and I think this is a deck a lot of players, especially that are higher skill level, are going to start to take notice of, because we've already seen people starting to side deck cards like Artifact Lancia and different things like that, just because they actually respect this matchup. And they also happen to duel against Danger Thunder Dragon, but at the same time, it's still a threat because this deck can pump out Azathoth. This deck can just Borosword OTK you in a very similar way to that of Danger Thunder Dragon, where it can just summon a bunch of monsters, just vomiting its hand onto the field and just killing you in one fell swoop. So again, do not underestimate the power of Danger Orcust, because otherwise it will be the reason that you lose out on making the top cut at any of these large scale events. Beyond that, though, there are still plenty of other decks that are viably in contention to make top cut and possibly even win a YCS. We've got stuff like, Trickstar, we've got Guru Control, we've got Draco, we've got Pendulum. All these decks were in attendance at the UDS and honestly made day 2, so they had a viable chance of making it into that top cut, and it could have changed the course of history if any one of those decks happened to have made it. Now, obviously, you're going to have the consistency of decks like Salamangreat and Sky Striker and the overwhelming power of decks like Danger Thunder Dragon and Danger Orcust to deal with, but that doesn't mean these decks are unplayable. I love the format that we're in currently because there's like 8 or 10 viable decks realistically, and yeah, some are better than others, but I think it's cool that like it's not just this overwhelming power creep where you can only play like 1 of 3 decks competitively if you want to have a realistic shot at making top cut. Now, the last thing I want to touch on is what tech cards emerge from the weekend. We're starting to see a lot of DD Crow, because DD Crow is very good against Salamangreat because you can hit stuff like their Spinny, you can hit stuff like their Counter Trap, anything that they can recur from the graveyard that's really going to be annoying for you to basically play through on your following turn. Crow is going to be an amazing card that you're going to want to see. The fact that it's also not once per turn is pretty nice as well, so if you haven't gotten your DD Crows, I'd highly recommend you do so. And then also Summon Limit. Now, Summon Limit's a card that isn't really new. We started to see Summon Limit, pop up a little bit here and there, but I think this card is starting to become a lot more popular, especially now with Salamangreat being so staple in the meta, because this card, as soon as they go like Gazelle Spinny, you just flip Summon Limit, and it's basically Vanity's Emptiness. They can't do anything else. Your board is going to be completely unhindered, and you're going to be able to just probably kill your opponent on the next turn. And a lot of different decks can take advantage of Summon Limit in different ways, which I think is really neat, but it also duels against the combo decks like Danger Thunder Dragon and Danger Orcust, since they're going to be summoning as many monsters as they possibly can. So Summon Limit is going to be an incredibly powerful side deck tool that you might want to consider moving forward into this format, or might want to consider having cards to side for it just because it could be the bane of your existence. So guys, those are just my thoughts. Let me know down in the comments what you guys think about the March 2019 format as we move forward, and what decks you might expect to see at YCS Atlanta. Do you think it's going to be a ton of meta just like we see here? Are there going to be any sleeper decks? Be sure to let me know down in the comments below. I'd really love to hear your thoughts. So guys, thank you so much for watching the video. Be sure to like the video as always, subscribe to the channel for more amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content, and if you found this video helpful, consider supporting me on Patreon or becoming a YouTube channel member, because just by showing your support in any way that you can, you're investing in my ability to continue bringing you amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content. So thanks so much again, and we'll see you next time.